This show talks about books that feature mental health and mental illness topics. There are many books that include this topic, and my hope is that more and more people know about them because they help to decrease the stigma and help people not feel so alone in their struggle. I am your host, Robin Tamanaha, licensed marriage and family therapist. Joining me on this episode is my guest, Kevin Petersen, licensed marriage and family therapist, who wrote the book Chronic Hope, Families and Addiction. Hi, Kevin.
Hey, how are you, Robin?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Good. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I could talk about me all day long.
All right. I'm excited. So before we get started, I do like my guests to introduce themselves. So is there anything you want to say about yourself, who you are, what else you do that you want the listeners to know about you?
Sure. So my name's Kevin Petersen. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of Colorado and the state of Florida. I have an office in Denver, Colorado, and I have 4 folks that work for me there. And I have an office here in Jacksonville Beach, Florida, and I have another person that works for me here. And so I initially started Petersen Family Counseling in April of 2014. And then about a year ago, I created the Chronic Hope Institute, which still Petersen Family Counseling is a function of the Chronic Hope Institute, but we've changed our focus. And our focus is that we work with families that are struggling with addiction and codependency and help them find recovery.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And so you've really branched out because you have like multiple different locations too. That's great. Wow.
Yeah, a bunch of folks working for us, and we've also kind of really tried to blanket as much possible in the social media area. One of our goals is to be able to provide as much information for free. So we have our own podcast, and we have a YouTube channel, and we have a Facebook group called these are all under the Chronic Hope Institute name. And let's see, we have our website, chronichope.us, and we try to flood people with as much information as humanly possible. And then the book we're going to talk about, and the other book that I wrote. And our goal, honestly, is when people get into a little bit of a crisis with a family member that's struggling with addiction or alcoholism, we want them to be able to access information and sort of get a step-by-step plan of what to do and how we can help them.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing all that. And what I'll do too is everything that you mentioned, I'll have that in the show notes and on the booksbetweensessions.com website. So the listeners can go and check out all your social media and the Facebook and the podcast. That's really cool.
Yeah, awesome.
So let's get into it. I read your book.
Thank you.
And it's really good. It's like packed with a lot of really good, helpful information and like actionable steps at the end of each chapter. I thought that was really neat.
Yeah, in writing that was the goal. So there's so many books about addiction and codependency and recovery and all that sort of stuff, but they tend to be very much like informational or therapeutic or that sort of thing. And what I was really hoping to do was give people direction, focus and direction, like, let's do this. I broke the book up into 3 categories, and that's before treatment. And that's kind of like, okay, my family member has a problem. What do I do? And sort of the analogy, I like telling stories. So the analogy that we always use in that environment is, imagine you come home and your house is on fire, and you call the fire department, and they show up, and they attach the hose to the trucks, and they attach the hose to the fire hydrant, and they turn on the hose, but they don't turn on the water into your house. And right before they turn the water on into your house to put the fire out, they stop and they look at you and say, so Robin, how does it make you feel to watch your house on fire? So Robin, what does this make you feel like? What does this remind you of? Tell me your thoughts and your innermost feelings. And that's kind of what we get taught as therapists. We're not taught to be like, here's what you do, and people that are in that kind of crisis, they want an immediate solution. They're like, no, I don't care how I feel. I want my person to not die from an overdose or anything like that. So what are we going to do? And so really my goal is to give them an immediate triage and an immediate solution. And that's the first section of the book. And then the second section of the book is during treatment. Once we've addressed the person, gone through all the stuff, given them some options and opportunities, and then held our ground and held our boundaries, then in the second part, we really go to the family and say, hey, let's talk about how this happened and how we can make sure it doesn't happen again and how we can take care of the family. And then in the third part, it's about bringing everybody back together and reintegrating, but doing it successfully so that change occurs for everybody.
Yeah. I like what's the whole process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that comes from my personal experience. I grew up in Palo Alto, California, back when nobody knew where Palo Alto was. They were like, what? Where's that? I'm like,
now it's like very well known. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I was actually born at Stanford Hospital. I'm the fourth generation of my family to be from the Bay Area. My dad grew up in San Jose. My grandfather grew up in Berkeley, and my great-grandfather grew up in San Luis Obispo. And so that is my home. That is my environment. So I grew up in the Bay Area, but I grew up with a mom that had a prescription drug problem, and she was an addict and had mental health issues as well. And so I know what it's like to be the family member. And then around 13, I started using and drinking myself, and I was like, whew, this is great. I need more of this, and took off to the races with that. And so now I'm a member of an addict household, an addicted family. And then I became an addict. And then when I was 26, my family circled the wagons and said, you have to quit or you can't be part of the family. And so I got sober on May 5th, 1991, when I was 27 years old.
Wow.
And I've been sober ever since. And then in January of 2008, I went back to school at Regis University in Denver. And I graduated in 2011 with a master's degree in marriage and family therapy. So that story is, I know what it's like to be the family member. I know what it's like to be the addict who's using. I know what it's like to be the addict who's sober. And I know what it's like to be the mental health professional dealing with all that stuff.
Wow. All those things combined, like I can imagine like how that is so helpful in being a really aware therapist for this population.
Yeah, that's really significant. Yeah, I think it's really significant is that, the families that I work with really, one of the things they say repeatedly is, I finally feel like I'm talking to somebody that understands, that's been through it, that gets it. And they read the book. I mean, I'm going to tell you, almost always when they read the book, their first comment was, man, I wish I'd had this book 5 or 10 years ago. And I'm like, oh, well, that's why I wrote it, to try to get it out there. And because it details the plan of what to do and how to handle it and how to take care of business. And I think a lot of times that's where the families are struggling, is that they end up engaging with therapists, psychiatrists, doctors, priests, ministers, rabbis, school counselors, whatever. And there's nothing wrong with those folks, but they just don't have the direct personal experience of what it's like to deal with this in the family situation and what it's like to deal with an addict. And they don't have a plan. They don't have a direct linear plan of here's what we're going to do.
Yeah. Thank you too for sharing your personal story.
Yeah. You're very welcome.
Yeah. So let's get into some of the stuff. I have some questions.
Sorry.
How would someone know, I guess, if they maybe are thinking or maybe suspecting that their loved one or family member might be an addict? Like, how would they know?
That's a great question. And that's kind of like one of the first things that happens, right? Is the first phone call is like, I think my family member has a problem, but I don't know. I'm not sure. And so there's a couple of things we take a look at. The first part is what so how I kind of answer that is I break people that use drugs and alcohol into 3 categories. The first category is what we call a social user. And that's someone that has a glass of wine or a beer, maybe a little bit here and there, once in a while, no big deal. And then they're like, ooh, I can feel it. I need to stop, that's a social person. And then we have what we call sort of like a hard drinker or a hard user. And that's somebody that uses drugs or alcohol aggressively. But when they start to have consequences, okay, when their relationships start to deteriorate, their job is threatened, they're getting in trouble with the law, they're getting in trouble at school or work, their friends are bailing out on them, they can actually stop or moderate their behavior. They can actually control it. And then we get into the final category, the addict and the alcoholic. And the addict and the alcoholic can't do that. They might be able to put on a little bit of a show, but they cannot control it. And that the bottom line is that they're always going to go back to the drugs and the alcohol, no matter what. And they don't have that filter. They don't have that on-off switch. And so the answer to your question is, if you're looking at your loved one and you're wondering whether or not you want to be able to take a look at it and see, well, when they drink or use, can they control it, or does it control them?
Yeah, that makes sense. That's really helpful. Thank you for explaining that. Yeah, because it's a tough one sometimes to piece apart, but the way you clarified that, I think is super, super helpful. Yeah, and they've probably been seeing that for some time. Kind of they could probably be able to tell, like, oh yeah, I think they're they're kind of struggling to control it.
Well, I mean, the classic conversation with the individual is always like, well, I can quit whenever I want to. I'm totally in control. I'm like, okay, quit today. And they're like, well, I don't want to. And I'm like, well, no, that's you just defeated yourself.
Yeah.
Let's see if you can quit for a week. Just don't use anything for a week. 100% nothing for a week. And let's see how it goes. And inevitably, if they're a social person, they're like, yeah, okay, no problem. No big deal. I don't care. If they're a hard drinker, you're going to get some resistance or some flack, and they may argue and fight with it. But if they're given a parameter from, like, let's say your husband or your wife, your significant other says, look, if you don't get this under control, I'm out of here. We're done. And so then it's a question of, well, what's more important? Are the drugs and the alcohol more important, or is the relationship more important? And the hard drinker can regulate. The alcoholic or the addict can't. They just can't.
Got it.
Yeah. So what we want to be able to do is, by the way, this is part of the whole system that I created in the Chronic Hope Families and Addiction. And this is really a very important point, because the next thing people say is, oh, well, you're just saying practice tough love. No, I don't believe in tough love. It doesn't work. What I believe in is saying, I'm going to set some limits and some boundaries and tell you what I'm okay with. And I'm going to offer you help. I have a solution for you. And I'm happy to help you get to the solution. I'm happy to help you get to where you need to be to have a better life. But I'm not going to stand by and watch you kill yourself. So you have to make a choice.
So it sounds like, too, then, that the way you just explained it is the family member or the loved one, too, has to maybe think about their relationship with the person, how they're going to help. And when it comes to that, does the loved one have to, or would it be helpful for them to do their own kind of work then on?
Yes, and that's really more what we do. Our goal is really to work with the family members and we don't work with the addicts. I mean, we can, but our goal is really to work with the family and help the family to set up a system of boundaries. We look at 3 categories of the life. And the first one is drugs and alcohol. And it's simple: no drugs, no alcohol. Easy. But then every boundary has to have, like, some teeth behind it. There has to be an accountability function, right? So the accountability has to be that we're going to drug test and we're going to do, like, breathalyzers on a regular basis. And then the last piece has to be what we call structure, which is consequences or rewards. So if you pass the test and you're clean, then everything's groovy and we're having good, everything's wonderful. But if you don't, then there has to be a series of consequences available. And I don't mean that in, like, a mean, angry, shaming, punishing way, but there has to be, well, if you can't keep yourself clean and sober, then we need to get you care to get you help with that. I'm all about helping people. I'm not about punishing people, And so the first part is drugs and alcohol. The second category is work or school. So, either you're going to school, or a lot of times I work with people that it's their children they're concerned with, or you're going to work full time, and then you're contributing to the family's financial situation. And then the same thing. We're going to accountability is we're going to, you're going to pay a paycheck in every week, or we're going to check your grades every week. It's not micromanaging. We're not doing day-to-day micromanagement. We're not calling after you every day. It's just once a week, we're going to sit down. We're going to review the drug tests. We're going to review, are you going to school? Are you turning your homework? Are you going to classes? How are your grades? Or, did you get a paycheck? Did you show up to work? And then the last piece is behavior within the family. And so behavior at home is really about taking a look at what are the standards of behavior we have as a family. No lying, no hitting, the stuff you learned in kindergarten, right? No cheating, be respectful, be kind, do your chores, da 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 da. And so we're just going to lay out that plan. We call that Plan A. And then we try that for, a week or 2 or 30 days, depending on the situation, and we see how it goes. And if they can't handle Plan A, then we go to Plan B, and Plan B is intervention and treatment.
Got it. And the way you explained it too it sounds good, because I would, and this is just a guess, right?
Yeah.
So if parents or loved ones or family members call in, they're probably at a loss. What do I do? So having some sort of structure, at least even if starting with the Plan A, I can imagine how they're there's maybe some relief. Okay, we're just going to fall upon this right now to see how it goes. If not, they're probably what do we do?
Well, yeah, they're very chaotic when they first call. It's the world's coming to an end and they don't know what to do. And they've tried what they've always done is sat down with the person and begged them and tried to reason with them and tried to rationalize with them and explain to them or threaten them or, tried to bribe them or anything along those lines. And those things don't work, And what you just got to do is be clear and concise. You just got to be able to look at the other person and say, hey, look, I love you. But I'm not willing to participate in this behavior anymore. Mm-hmm. So going forward, in order for us to contain or to keep our relationship, continue our relationship, these are the things that I need to see happen. And it's totally up to you. If you don't want to do them, that's fine. I'll respect your choices, but that means that we're going to be disengaging.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And the other way too, the addict, it also gives them, they know what to expect as well. Right. It's pretty
everything's
clear.
Transparent. Everything's on the table. Yeah.
About the Plan B, I think this may seem like a really big question, but how would they know where to go, or if it's individual therapy, how do they pick a therapist? How do they know?
So in Plan B, part of Plan A would actually be the therapy. Mm-hmm. Plan B would be intervention and treatment. And in the book, in those chapters in the book, we walk them through how to pick an interventionist, how to pick a treatment center, the things to look for in an individual therapist. That kind of comes at the end, actually, when everyone's coming back together, or in the middle. But we lay it out again, just like we lay out Plan A. In Plan B, we lay out sort of the decision tree, cash or insurance, because the treatment costs about $1,000 a day, inpatient treatment or more. So, and then the question becomes, what kind of insurance do you have? And does your insurance cover that? And, so let's start looking at the facilities that are available. And we try to educate people on the questions to ask. This is going to sound like a strange analogy, but it's like buying a car. You have to walk in knowing what your requirements are. This is what I can afford. This is what I need. I need someone that's going to be able to do substance abuse and mental health. I need someone that maybe is gender specific, or maybe I need someone who's LGBTQ plus friendly. Those are all important items. You don't want to stick a 75-year-old woman with a bunch of 22-year-old, heroin addicts. It just doesn't make any sense. You want to find a group, a cohort where they can actually feel like they're connected. And
Yeah. Yeah. And that's important to know. And I think too, I think us as therapists, we know kind of like, especially those of us that specialize in different things, we kind of know like if you have something in mind or like a particular thing you're working on, like finding someone in that area, whereas someone else who's like looking, for treatment, there's kind of this general like, well, they could just help, right? Like they'll just know, just kind of go in. But you're saying, which is very true, is like knowing what your parameters are and what your needs are, and then finding a match for that really makes sense. Yeah.
Exactly. And it really is about being able to walk in with a basic idea and then, having sort of a list of questions to ask. And ideally, you're doing this probably with the help of an interventionist. And the interventionist is the one that's going to kind of lead the show. They're the ones that are going to kind of run the deal, because they're going to walk in, sit everybody down and sit down with the person and say, look, here's the deal. I've been brought in, we're at the point
like
now.
Intervention. Yeah.
Exactly. Rarely are they that is clean and easy, but but and it's just about allowing them to do their job and run the show, and it works out really, really well. And then the really good part, I mean, so let's say we have a successful intervention and the person goes to treatment, then my job really kicks into overdrive, is that digging into that family and teaching them about how the addiction has actually run the family system, and helping them to learn how to change that, but not by changing the addict, by changing themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sure this might be running through the listener's mind right now. Why does the family have to do work?
Oh, I know, it's so unfair, And I don't mean, I'm not trying to be sarcastic. And that's a valid question. What did I do wrong? Here's the thing, and this is the key phrase to remember. You're not responsible for your loved one's addiction, but you are responsible for how you react to it. Okay. So if someone and someone you love is sort of going down that rabbit hole of addiction or alcoholism and can't pull out, the odds are that you have probably, ignored it, denied it, enabled it, engaged with it, tried to negotiate with it. And I'm not saying it's your fault, because it's not your fault by no means. But what you have done is sort of allowed it to coexist within the family structure. And what we got to do is, going forward, is take a look at that and understand why, and where does that come from, and what is the, what I hear a lot of times is, well, I mean, he's a functional alcoholic, and I want to be super clear with you. I believe there's no such thing. If someone is an alcoholic, when I look at the concept of alcohol, where they cannot control the amount of alcohol they drink, and that their life has become completely out of control as well, that's not functional. And then a lot of times when someone says, oh, he's a functional alcoholic, I'm like, well, how's your relationship with him? Well, we don't have one. How's the relationship with the kids? There's no relationship with the kids. I'm like, okay, well, that's not functional.
Right.
But the family is allowing that to happen, and it's like, well, okay, hold on. The family needs to take a stand. In my estimation, if you truly love someone, you're actually going to step up to them and say, hey, I love you, and this is not okay. But I'm not shaming you, and I'm not mad at you. I want to help you, and let's find you some help. But if they refuse the help, it's like, okay, well, then I'm going to have to put some distance between us.
Yeah. And I could picture too, like, while the person is in their treatment, right, wherever they are, and at some point they're going to come back home.
And that's the final phase, is the reintegration process, is when everybody comes back together. And we want to be able to have the family operating differently, right? So people are not doing the codependent behavior patterns. They're not being passive aggressive. They're not people pleasing. They're not doing denial. They're not doing the standard stuff of, triangulation and talking about people behind their back, but never saying anything to their face. So we want to work on the family while the individual's in treatment. And the individual in treatment is working on their stuff as well, so that when we all come together, we're healing together as a family. It's not this, it's all your fault. It's, hey, you know what we realize is we as a group have to learn how to do things differently and make this work better.
Yeah. And then I would imagine when the person comes back home, there's that practice of that, probably the things that they've been talking about and trying to work on their own. And then now they get that's the opportunity, I would think, for them to really practice all that stuff and see how that goes.
And vice versa. It's really about, here's my other, I love acronyms and phrases. That's my stuff. Consistency, accountability, and transparency. And consistency is doing the same thing over and over again, and in a positive fashion, meaning, so let's just take the concept of, hey, you know what? I think I need to go to the gym. I want to get in better shape and get my health better and lose weight. Okay. Well, consistency is you got to go to the gym or exercise regularly. You got to eat differently. You got to eat healthy regularly. That's consistency. Same thing over and over again. Accountability is you got to have somebody that you're talking to about this. You got to have somebody that you're sharing this with and engaging with. And I don't mean reporting into like a parole officer. I just mean somebody that I'm like, hey, I went to the gym 3 times this week and man, I really felt good and I was doing a pretty good job eating and I just wanted to share that with you. And somebody that's just going to be very neutral to you, like, oh, that's great. Yeah, and here's what I'm doing. Kind of like a back and forth thing, And then transparency is really critical, especially in this family system that we're talking about. And transparency is that there are no more secrets. We're going to put all the cards on the table and we're going to let things just be what they are and who they are and where they are, and that way that's an incredibly healthy way of living, and it requires people to really go after their stuff individually so that they can be a part of the collective, a part of the family. So healthy families come from healthy individuals. Healthy individuals work on their stuff. Everybody has stuff.
Yeah. It's like full circle. Everything just comes back around, right?
Yeah. It really does. I mean, that really is it's just the reality of the situation is that it's always going to come back to, being part of the family and engaging as a family and the family trying to do better as a group, not just pointing out individual people.
Yeah. And the great thing too is that there is hope, right? There is hope for change. Like you said, new responses. And ultimately, it comes from a good place, right? Of coming together, being with the family, helping them, helping each other, having a new way of being with each other. I mean, those are all great and amazing things. Like what a great opportunity, for everyone actually.
Right. And the whole idea there is that everybody gets a chance to get better individually. And then in that process, we all get healthier collectively, So we start interacting with each other on a healthier level. And we start sort of being really supportive of one another, engaging with one another, and not using the old patterns of shame and guilt and manipulation and back talking or hiding, that sort of thing. We got to get rid of that stuff. We got to get to the point where people are just being, hey, this is who I am. This is what I am. And, I love you. And let's just move forward. Yeah. I mean, that's the ideal, right?
Yeah. So, is there anything I didn't ask about that you wanted to discuss or share with the listeners?
Oh my gosh. Let's see. So we talked about the 3 sections of the book. We talked about, well, one thing I would say that I think is really important for the listeners to understand that there's a huge difference between marijuana and alcohol and the level of street drugs that exist today. So when we're talking about marijuana and alcohol, I tend to be a lot more open-minded into the concept of let's take a couple of weeks or maybe a month and get plan A moving and see if we can get some traction, make things better. And that's why drug testing becomes so critical, because when you do drug testing at a facility, not at home, what you get is a data point readout of numbers, not just a positive, negative. What we get is how much they're using and how often they're using, and it's critical to know that, so that when we start measuring them on a weekly basis, if we want to see the numbers coming down, right? Because sometimes drugs stay in your body for a long time, like marijuana can stay in for a month. But when it comes to like heroin, opiates, meth, cocaine, benzos, that sort of stuff, I have a really short fuse policy. It's like, hey, we got to get in on this fast because people die. That stuff, fentanyl, all that stuff, people get killed really quickly, and I don't want that to happen. And, that's honestly where this comes from is my mom actually died in 2014 of long-term prescription drug use. And when I went to the hospital, she had 3 heart attacks and she was in the ICU and they had her on, they were just keeping her alive on the machines. And when I got there, the doctor was like, I'm so sorry. There's just nothing I can do. And I was like, yeah, I know. It's okay. I mean, I get it. And he's like, really? Because your dad's over here in the ER or in the waiting room. And he is just like, I can't believe this. This is such a surprise. And I said, I understand what you're saying. And I appreciate that. And, I said, look, I'm a therapist. This is all I do. And I said, I confronted my mom years ago and was told to mind my own business. And I said, I'm not shocked. I'm not surprised. I'm sad. I'm deeply saddened. And he's like, okay, now I understand better. I want to help families avoid that situation.
Yeah.
I hate the fact that I see people all the time, watching people go down this hole of addiction and never like trying to reach down and grab them and say, hey, I'll help you if you want help. I'm here for you. But if you don't want the help, that's okay. But we got to understand that means we're not going to engage, and giving them a concrete plan to follow and steps to follow. And I know it's hard. I mean, it's really hard, and I get it, but I think it's important that families are given an option and given an opportunity. And that I think it's also important that they're given an option and opportunity from someone that's been through the process, personally and family wise and professional wise, and I think it's important that they see that and get that. And also I think it's important that it's affordable. The books are $10. The podcast, the social media, the videos, those are all free. Working with my staff or myself, yes, you have to pay by the hour, but it's not $20,000. It's a couple $100 an hour.
Right. Yeah. And going off what you said, thanks for sharing your story about your mom. Like, that's the scary thing, is that like the end could be death, right?
Well, that's the thing, and I want to be clear. It's really interesting. I broke my cardinal rule, and I responded to a Facebook conversation that I have this sort of like, I won't do that because you end up getting sucked into this black hole of argument. But this person it was on a therapist Facebook page, said, what's worse, addiction or depression? And it really saddened me that the overwhelming majority of therapists that responded said depression. And so I said, no, it's addiction. And the guy was like, why? I said, because if you don't treat addiction, the client will die. And he said, well, haven't you heard of suicide? I said, everyone that has depression doesn't end up trying to kill themselves. Everyone that has addiction will end up dying from the addiction sooner or later. That's just how it works.
Yeah.
And I said, and I was thinking, the fact that was that guy's response told me everything I need to know about his knowledge and understanding of addiction. And again, I don't criticize him for that. I'm saddened that our industry, that our colleagues are not more aware of addiction.
Yeah. Yeah. And as someone who, in my private practice, I specialize in depression and bipolar disorder. So I will second you on that, in that, no, like, depression doesn't always lead to suicide or death. So. Yeah.
I mean, I worked my first 3 years out of grad school. I worked on a crisis response team where I did respond to suicidal clients that were in the ER, and would find treatment for them, find facilities. It was kids under 18. And, 9 times out of 10, we'd roll them back home and then go into the home and do family therapy at the home and change the family system. Mm-hmm. Turned out that was the most successful way to stop 16-year-olds from trying to kill themselves, was change the family system. And so that's where I kind of learned that concept, or learned that idea that, if you want to change the individual, change the family system, change where they come from. and how they work and how they interact with each other and their support system. And that's where you see the most success. And but I got it that people that were, I mean, and a lot of times, obviously, kids when they make suicidal statements, and say, "Oh, I'm going to kill myself," they automatically get sent to the ER. That's just straight over. And I understand why, because we don't want to take that chance, But when you're 14, 15, or 16, the odds are you don't really have the emotional vocabulary and the emotional bandwidth to understand the difference between I want to kill myself and God, I'm just feeling completely overwhelmed and defeated. There's a lot of adults that don't have that capacity. So, I get it. But when it comes to addiction, one of the things we say in recovery is that the addiction always wins, no matter what. The addiction always wins, unless you turn to recovery.
Yeah.
The addiction will always win, unless you turn to recovery. So, I want people to. I just want to help people. That the bottom line is, at the end of the day, I want to help people, and that's why all our information is free.
Yeah, and you're doing that in multiple different avenues for sure.
I hope so.
Which is great. Well, I'm gonna wrap up. Thanks for doing this. This was so helpful.
It's my pleasure. I'm had so much fun getting to know you, and this is a topic that I could just talk about forever.
Yeah, and you come back.
Yeah, well, I have another book.
Yeah, which I did receive. So thank you.
Good.
I went to my P.O. box yesterday.
Cool.
So I go every once in a while. So I got it. So I'm going to read that. So yeah, you're always welcome back.
Okay.
And like I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to list all your social media handles, your website, the podcast, which is also called the Chronic Hope Institute, you said, right?
Yep.
So I'm going to list that. And then that way our listeners can just click on it on the show notes or on the website. Okay.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for doing this. It was a pleasure having you on. This was fun and informative. Yeah.
It was my pleasure, and I'm honored, and thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
Okay.
Thanks for listening. Hopefully this was informative or helpful. If you think this episode may be helpful to others that you know, please be sure to share this episode with them. Resources mentioned on this episode can be found at the podcast website, booksbetweensessions.com. The social media handles and website for today's guest is listed in the show notes and on booksbetweensessions.com. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, please be sure to leave us a rating. If you would like to stay up to date, please subscribe to this podcast and follow the podcast Instagram, Books Between Sessions. I post multiple videos and lives every month, so be sure to follow our Instagram so you can see extra content. And if you have any book suggestions or books you would like discussed on this podcast, please send us a message on the contact page of the podcast website, booksbetweensessions.com. If you're an author who has written a book that includes mental health or mental illness topics and would like to be a guest on the podcast, complete the form on the Be on the Podcast page of our website. Also, this podcast is not psychotherapy or counseling. If you need to speak with a professional, you should find one local to you and contact them directly. If this is an emergency, please call your local emergency number or go to your nearest emergency department.